Before you decide this video isn't for you, let me ask you something uncomfortable. If she hurt you today and messaged you tomorrow, would your strength disappear in one reply? If the answer, even as might be yes, then you need to hear this all the way through. Most people think the pain is the problem. It isn't. The problem is what pain quietly pushes you to do when no one is watching. The late-night explanations you rehearse, the dignity you trade for one last conversation, the version of yourself you slowly abandon just to feel chosen again. What I'm about to say won't comfort you. It will challenge the story you've been telling yourself about love, loyalty, and loss. Because the truth is, the moment she hurt you, a door opened, not to heartbreak, but to leverage, clarity, and a level of self-respect most people never reach. You don't flip the script by reacting louder. You flip it by becoming someone who no longer needs the script explained. And that shift doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you understand what silence really does to the human mind, why explaining yourself weakens you, and how emotional independence quietly rewrites every dynamic you're in. This isn't about getting her back. It's about never being in a position where losing someone costs you yourself again. By the end of this video, you won't be looking for revenge, closure, or validation. You'll be looking at your pain differently. You'll understand why she had power over you, and exactly how that power dissolves without a single argument, message, or goodbye. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't motivation. It's a psychological shift that changes how people respond to you forever. When someone hurts you, the instinct is to frame it as a failure of love. You tell yourself you gave too much, trusted the wrong person, opened your heart at the wrong time. But that interpretation keeps you trapped inside emotion, and emotion alone is a poor strategist. What actually happened is far more revealing. Pain is not evidence that love was wrong. Pain is evidence that a boundary was crossed, tested, or never clearly enforced in the first place. People do not hurt you randomly. They hurt you at the point where access is easiest. That access is not created by your feelings. It is created by your standards. When a woman hurts you, she is not consciously deciding to destroy you. She is responding to the structure of the dynamic. She is sensing how much you tolerate, how quickly you forgive, how often you override your own discomfort to keep the connection alive. Pain, in that sense, is feedback. It is the psyche alerting you that something in your internal framework is misaligned. This is where most men misunderstand the situation. They personalize what should be analyzed. They ask, "Why wasn't I enough?" instead of asking, "Why did I allow this pattern to repeat?" One question weakens you, the other sharpens you. The moment you stop interpreting hurt as rejection and start seeing it as information, you move from victorhood to authorship. You stop being the character reacting to the story and become the one rewriting it. Boundaries are not ultimatums. They are not threats. They are quiet rules you live by before anyone else ever needs to know them. When those rules are unclear, people will step on them without even realizing it. Not because they are cruel, but because human beings respond to what is permitted. Pain often enters when you prioritize being chosen over choosing yourself. You ignore early discomfort because you are afraid that naming it will cost you connection. But the irony is this: the connection is already costing you yourself. There is also a philosophical layer here that is uncomfortable but necessary. Growth rarely arrives wrapped in kindness. It arrives as disruption. Pain interrupts patterns that comfort would allow to continue indefinitely. If you had not been hurt, you might have kept negotiating your self-respect in small, invisible ways. You might have kept calling emotional anxiety passion and inconsistency mystery. Pain removes the romance from illusion. It forces clarity, and clarity is power. Once you see pain as a boundary signal rather than a love failure, your behavior changes naturally. You stop over-explaining because you no longer feel the need to justify your standards. You stop chasing answers because the lesson is already clear. You begin to ask harder questions of yourself, not in self-blame, but in self-responsibility. Where did I abandon my intuition? Where did I tolerate confusion instead of addressing it? Where did I confuse patience with self-betrayal? This is not about becoming rigid or emotionally closed. It is about becoming internally consistent. People feel safest with those who know where they stand, even when they don't like the limits. Pain teaches you where your limits need to exist. Ignoring that lesson guarantees repetition. Integrating it transforms your relationships entirely. There is also dignity in recognizing that someone can hurt you without being your enemy. Hurt does not always mean malice. Sometimes it means misalignment. Sometimes it means two people operating from different levels of self-awareness. When you understand this, you stop seeking revenge or validation. You focus instead on recalibration. You correct the internal imbalance that allowed the pain to take root. This is why the strongest response to being hurt is not confrontation and not silence for the sake of control, but internal restructuring. When your boundaries solidify internally, your external world adjusts automatically. People either rise to meet you or fall away without drama. Both outcomes are wins. So if she hurt you, don't rush to label it as heartbreak. See it as a message. Something in you is asking to be strengthened. Something is asking to be honored. Pain is not here to punish you. It is here to refine you. And the moment you treat pain as instruction rather than rejection, you stop asking who hurt you and start becoming someone who cannot be easily hurt again. After pain, most people feel an urgent need to speak, to clarify, to explain, to be understood. Silence feels dangerous because it feels like losing control of the narrative. But this urgency is rarely strength. It is anxiety disguised as honesty. Silence, when chosen consciously and supported by growth, is not avoidance. It is regulation. And regulation is where power begins. There is a critical difference between disappearing and withdrawing. Disappearing is reactive. It is fueled by hurt, resentment, and the hope that absence will punish the other person. Withdrawing, on the other hand, is intentional. It is the decision to step back so your nervous system can reset and your identity can stabilize. When you withdraw with purpose, silence becomes a boundary rather than a tactic. Psychologically, silence unsettles people because it removes feedback. When someone no longer reacts, explains, or pursues, the mind begins to fill in the gaps. This is not manipulation, it is human cognition at work. The brain seeks patterns and meaning. When the familiar emotional responses vanish, uncertainty takes their place. And uncertainty forces reflection. What did I miss? What changed? Why does this feel different now? But silence alone is not enough. Silence without growth feels empty. It reads as confusion or emotional shutdown. That is why growth must be visible, even if it is never announced. Growth shows up in posture, in routine, in the way you speak less but say more. It shows up in how you stop orbiting someone else's mood and start organizing your life around your own values. This kind of growth cannot be faked for long because it is not performative. It is structural. When you grow quietly, something subtle but powerful happens. The dynamic shifts from emotional dependency to emotional autonomy. You are no longer asking to be reassured, to be chosen, or to be validated. You are demonstrating that your stability does not require an audience. That is deeply unsettling to anyone who was accustomed to having emotional leverage over you. Philosophically, silence backed by growth reflects self-respect. It communicates that your inner world is not available for negotiation during moments of chaos. This does not mean you are closed off or indifferent. It means you are selective. You are no longer willing to process pain in public or resolve it through external approval. You are doing the work privately, where it actually transforms you. This is where many men get confused. They think strength looks like emotional suppression. It does not. Suppression hardens you. Regulation grounds you. In regulated silence, emotions are felt fully, but they are not acted out impulsively. You do not deny your pain, you metabolize it. You turn it into insight, discipline, and clarity. And clarity always reads as confidence. Silence paired with growth also restores your sense of authorship. When you stop narrating your healing, you stop outsourcing its meaning. You no longer need someone else to recognize your progress for it to be real. Your life begins to expand beyond the injury. New routines form, new standards emerge. Your attention shifts from the past to the architecture of your future. And here is the paradox most people miss. When you stop trying to be seen, you become more visible. Not because you demand attention, but because your energy changes. Calm is noticeable in a world addicted to reaction. Focus is attractive in a world drowning in distraction. People sense when someone has moved from emotional chaos to inner alignment. At this point, the question of whether she notices or not becomes irrelevant. You are no longer acting to provoke a response. You are acting to preserve your equilibrium. That is the moment silence stops being a strategy and becomes a lifestyle. You are no longer quiet to make a point. You are quiet because your life is finally speaking for you. Silence with growth is not about control. It is about coherence. When your actions align with your values, you no longer need to explain yourself. The noise falls away naturally. And what remains is a grounded presence that cannot be shaken by someone else's inconsistency. So choose silence, not as withdrawal from connection, but as a return to yourself. Choose growth that does not beg for witnesses. Let your evolution be quiet, consistent, and undeniable, because the most powerful thing you can say after being hurt is nothing at all, while becoming everything you once abandoned. After being hurt, the most seductive impulse is to explain yourself, to lay out your intentions clearly, to prove that you meant well, to show emotional intelligence, maturity, depth. On the surface, this looks healthy. It feels like closure. But psychologically, excessive explanation after emotional injury is rarely about clarity. It is about control. It is the attempt to manage how you are perceived when your sense of value has been shaken. When you explain yourself to someone who has already hurt you, you are not informing them. You are positioning yourself beneath them. You are saying, without realizing it, that their understanding is required for your peace. And the moment you do that, you surrender leverage. Not leverage over them, but leverage over yourself. Attraction, respect, and emotional gravity are not built through verbal accuracy. They are built through emotional containment. The ability to hold your experience without needing immediate validation is one of the clearest markers of psychological strength. When you rush to explain your pain, you convert a private experience into a public performance. You turn dignity into negotiation. There is also a deeper dynamic at play. Explaining yourself is often an unconscious request to be reassured. You want the other person to say, "I see you," or "I didn't mean it," or "You matter." But reassurance given after damage does not heal the wound. It temporarily soothes anxiety while reinforcing the belief that your worth is determined externally. Over time, this erodes attraction and self-respect simultaneously. From a philosophical perspective, the need to be understood is one of the ego's most persistent traps. The ego believes that if it can just articulate itself perfectly, it will be safe from pain. But life does not reward perfect explanations, it rewards internal alignment. When your actions, values, and boundaries are congruent, misunderstanding becomes tolerable. You stop needing consensus to feel whole. This is why restraint is so powerful, not silence born of fear, but silence born of self-trust. When you trust your own perception, you do not need to convince someone else of it. You recognize that someone can misunderstand you and still not define you. That realization is deeply unsettling to people who are accustomed to emotional access. Explaining yourself also keeps you emotionally tethered to the moment of injury. Every explanation reopens the wound. Every clarification replays the narrative. Healing requires distance, not rehearsal. When you stop explaining, you allow the nervous system to exit survival mode. You shift from reaction to reflection, and reflection is where insight lives. There is a misconception that emotional intelligence means constant emotional expression. In reality, emotional intelligence is knowing when expression is useful and when it is self-sabotage. Not every feeling needs a witness. Not every hurt deserves a conversation. Some experiences are meant to reorganize you internally, not be processed aloud. When you resist the urge to explain, something important happens. Your attention turns inward. You begin to ask different questions. Not, did I say the right thing? But, why did I feel the need to justify myself? That question leads to growth. It reveals where your sense of worth may still be outsourced, where approval still feels like safety. And as you reclaim that authority, your presence changes. You speak less but with more precision. You no longer rush to fill silence. You allow others to sit with the consequences of their actions without cushioning the discomfort. This is not cruelty. It is maturity. It is allowing reality to do its work without interference. People often mistake this shift for emotional distance. It is not distance. It is grounding. You are no longer emotionally inflated or deflated by someone else's response. You are centered, and centered people are magnetic not because they try to be, but because they are not trying at all. The paradox is this. The more you explain yourself, the less you are felt. The less you explain, the more weight your presence carries. This is because explanation appeals to logic, while restraint appeals to instinct. And human connection, especially attraction and respect, is driven far more by instinct than argument. So, the next time you feel the urge to send that message, to clarify one more time, to make sure they really understand how you feel, pause. Ask yourself whether you are speaking from strength or from fear. Ask whether this explanation will deepen your alignment or dilute it. Because the moment you stop explaining your worth is the moment your worth becomes undeniable. At some point, if you've done the inner work honestly, something subtle but decisive shifts. You stop waiting. Not just waiting for a message, or an apology, or a realization from her, but waiting for permission to move forward. This is the moment where the real transformation happens. Because until now, even your silence, your growth, your restraint may still have been quietly oriented toward her response. And that is still a form of dependence. Internal authority begins the moment her reaction stops being the reference point for your life. Psychologically, this is the hardest stage because it requires relinquishing a hidden hope. The hope that she will eventually see what she lost. The hope that your composure will trigger regret. The hope that your absence will be felt deeply enough to validate your pain. These hopes are understandable, but they keep your nervous system externally anchored. As long as you are watching for her response, she still occupies the center of your inner world. True power is not indifference. It is sovereignty. Sovereignty means your emotional state is governed from the inside. It means your self-image is no longer negotiated through memory, fantasy, or imagined conversations. You no longer rehearse what you would say if she reached out. You no longer measure your progress by whether she notices. Your life becomes self-referential. You act because it aligns with who you are becoming, not because it might provoke a particular outcome. Philosophically, this is the transition from ego to identity. The ego wants recognition. It wants to be seen as right, wronged, or valuable. Identity does not need an audience. Identity is stable whether it is acknowledged or not. When you step into internal authority, you stop asking, "How does this make me look?" and start asking, "Does this reflect who I am?" That single shift collapses an enormous amount of emotional noise. This is also where many men misinterpret strength. They believe winning means her return, her regret, or her acknowledgement. But those are external events. They are not under your control, and tying your sense of victory to them keeps you reactive. The real win is being unchanged by outcomes you cannot command. It is the ability to remain grounded regardless of whether someone re-enters your life or disappears permanently. When internal authority is established, closure becomes irrelevant. You no longer need the story to end neatly because you are no longer living inside that chapter. The past stops demanding commentary. It becomes information, not identity. You carry the lesson without carrying the weight. There is a quiet confidence that emerges here, not the loud performative kind, but a settled certainty. You trust your judgment again. You trust your timing. You trust that walking away from what destabilized you was not a loss, but an alignment. This trust is felt by others immediately. It shows up in how you move through rooms, how you listen without urgency, how you respond without defensiveness. And interestingly, this is often the point where dynamics truly reverse. Not because you intended them to, but because people sense when they no longer occupy a position of influence. But by then, the reversal no longer matters. You are not waiting to be chosen because you have already chosen yourself. Any interaction that follows is optional, not essential. Internal authority also restores your capacity to love correctly, not urgently, not anxiously, but deliberately. You stop bonding through pain and start bonding through alignment. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You recognize that peace is not boring. It is regulated, and regulated systems create sustainable connection. This is the deepest form of freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be unaffected by what no longer serves you. You are no longer rehearsing the past or bracing for the future. You are present, responsive, and self-directed. So if you are looking for the moment where the script truly flips, this is it. Not when she changes, not when she understands, but when her reaction no longer has the power to define your direction. Because the ultimate victory is not being remembered by the person who hurt you. It is becoming someone who no longer needs to be.